Trails fails. It's Trails fails time. I bet if you go into any community of Trails fanboys, such as the hellscape that is the Falcom subreddit, they'll rapidly leap at the opportunity to tell you just how much they hate these games, or certain parts of them at least. Really, I'm no exception. I'm a natural-born hater after all, so it's only natural for me to dump on something I like as much as I praise it. I previously made a top 10 best moments in the Trails series video, and I strongly recommend watching that first because this video will be building upon that one. I apologize in advance for the bad audio quality you may suffer through though. The Trails series has done a lot of things I really like, such as creating an extended series of games that's one continuous story, allowing each arc, its cast of characters, and its intricate universe to be fleshed out much better than those of other series. But with such a long and arduous story to get through, there will undoubtedly be several speed bumps along the way to test your resistance to cringe and your desire to bother continuing with such a long series. This video is here to highlight those moments, just for fun of course, and because some people suggested it. Like my favorite moments video, there aren't really many rules to this list other than they'll be ranked on how much they detracted from the overall experience of a certain game or the entire series, for me. So,
try to relax your anus,
as I might end up hating on something you like. One exception I will make, however, is that I will not be including optional content in the main list this time because, well, it's optional. It only detracts from the experience if you choose to do it. I know that it's heavily encouraged to do all available content to maximize your rewards, but still. I'll bring them up in the dishonorable mentions instead. It should go without saying that this video will have some heavy spoilers, and it will cover games up to Trails into Reverie. Though, spoiler alert for this video I guess, there won't be any spoilers for Reverie because it doesn't have any egregious moments that are worth covering here. At least in my opinion. Anyway, steel yourselves for some cringe. Okay, I lied. The first entry isn't really about cringe. It's actually about one of the most boring parts in the series, and I'm probably going to get some flack for this one too, but hear me out. Because I chose to exclude optional events, I actually had a really difficult time coming up with 10 moments to make up this list without just listing all the different Deus Ex Machina moments as separate entries. I originally had the first visit to the Mainz mining village in Trails from Zero written down because I remembered that place being one of the least interesting locations in the entire series, but then I tried to remember what else happened around that part of Trails from Zero and, well, I couldn't. Probably just a result of my garbage boomer memory, but it's all just a blur. So I'm putting the entire first chapter and most of the second chapter of Trails from Zero as my number 10 entry. There's a lot of personal factors that drove me to this as well though. Trails from Zero is pretty much a return to basics kind of game, and felt like starting over after the high-level meta gameplay of Trails in the Sky III, which is my favorite game in the series. But not only that, I had played Cold Steel 1, 2, and 3 prior to this game as well, making its combat really dull for most of the game. This game's story also moves at a very slow pace, and doesn't start to get really interesting until the end of Chapter 2, I think. I'm gonna have to play through this game again one of these days. Maybe then it will stick with me better. Let's talk about everyone's favorite character, Shirley Orlando. Yeah, we're going there alright. But before we get to it, I have a bit of a confession to make. Prior to making this list, I asked around what other people thought were the worst moments in the series, and the most common answer was the 2 moments where Shirley grabs another character's tits against their will, and that these scenes were very uncomfortable to watch. Can't relate, as I have too much of an internet brain I guess. And these scenes never even crossed my mind when making this list initially, but it did remind me of something about these games that really annoyed me when it comes to Shirley and another character, Angelica. So I had to put this on the list. These characters are portrayed as a blatant example of a trope called the psycho lesbian, especially Shirley, which is apparently common in anime and manga. Throughout the series, they are always flirting with other girls, and in Angelica's case, she is pretty much more flirtatious than all other characters combined. Most of these scenes are meant to be funny, but it happens often enough to the point that it gets annoying very early on. And yet, It never goes anywhere significant. They never develop a romance with any of their targets, and none of them express any of those feelings toward Angelica or Shirley either. Like, the only reason they were made to do this was to provide cheap fan service scenes that are ultimately meaningless, because by the end of Cold Steel 4, they are strongly hinted towards having feelings for characters that are male. That aren't exactly good matches for them. Sure, Falcom, whatever you say. This isn't higher on the list because it isn't really a significant plot point in the grand scheme of things, and it's not exactly fully confirmed they're going straight. Yet. But it's a point where character development, you know, the thing that these games have been good at for so long, took a backseat in favor of silly anime tropes and low-effort pandering fan service, a theme that will be prominent on this list. And also, a potential refusal to commit to making an actual lesbian character for some reason, when it's clear that's what they've wanted to do for quite a while now. Another theme that will be prominent on this list. A refusal to commit. You'll see.
Come on! Let's just have some fun while we've got the chance. What? Ah! What are you?
Alright, I want you weebs to be honest with me, and yourselves. Hot springs and beach scenes in anime, manga, and these types of games are made with one goal in mind: to find any excuse necessary to get characters as naked as possible while being appropriate enough to retain a wide audience. That's it. That's all there is to it, and you know it. So it's no wonder that hot spring scenes are in literally everything that comes out of Japan. What's that? Hot springs are a part of traditional Japanese culture, you say? Yeah, keep telling yourself that, you horny-ass weeb. Jokes aside, the annoying thing about scenes like this is that they are shoved into everything even when they don't need to exist. And Trails of Cold Steel 2 has tons of these scenes because Reen's hometown is high up in the mountains where hot springs are its main attraction. So at least in that regard, it's very believable because hot springs on a cold mountain is just kind of fitting, you know? In Trails in the Sky, however, there's a hot spring in a very unconventional spot, in the country of the Western European-inspired liberal that was imported from another country in Zemuria that, of course, is from the East, and very inspired by Asian culture. So they built an artificial Asian-ish hot springs bathhouse there where, you guessed it, the most cringy and only fan service scene in the first Trails in the Sky occurs. Because of course. This all goes down when Estelle is still in complete dunce mode, so naturally she walks in on Joshua while half naked and screams like an idiot, and rightfully gets chastised for it later. Fortunately, this is just a short scene, but damn, it was cringe. You could argue that it's used as a piece of development for Estelle and Joshua's budding romance, since it mostly involved the oblivious child Tita questioning Estelle about them being married, which was kind of amusing. But they could have done this any other way than literally importing a cliché hot spring scene into a location and game where it doesn't belong. Trails in the Sky's second chapter is arguably one of the most highly regarded games in the series, and if you ask people what their favorite moments are in those games, they'll probably mention parts very late in the game, such as when Estelle gets abducted onto the Ouroboros ship, where some very dire and serious plot revelations take place, and Estelle and Joshua finally get reunited shortly afterwards, and everything that happens on the Liber arc that culminates into a fantastic ending for the game. And if you watch my favorite moments video, well, you'd know that I'd have the same answers. But what about everything before that? Well, the first half of SC after the prologue can basically be described as retreading everything and everywhere we've seen in Trails in the Sky 1, which makes a lot of it kind of a pain in the ass and pretty forgettable. With a few exceptions, such as Chapter 3 with Ren's Psycho Tea Party, and Chapter 5 where you confront Luve and fight the dragon Ragnard. But all of this takes place in the same locations we've seen in the first game, with a few extra offbeat additional locations. So once it's over, it's like, man, finally. But not long after the aforementioned part where Estelle gets reunited with Joshua, the game makes you travel all over the world again. And not only that, this time there's some crazy orbital shutdown phenomenon going on, which means some of your characters won't be able to use their magic arts during the whole process. Couple that with a few missable events around the world that are very easy to miss because you're inclined to rush to get this part of the game over with as fast as possible. It's easily the worst part of the game and possibly the whole series from a gameplay perspective, even if it is wholly justified by the events of the story. If you're playing on higher difficulties, it's even worse, because this game wasn't balanced properly, and spamming arts is the key to winning most battles, as most physical attacks do very little damage, sometimes even no damage if your character isn't stacked for pure attack. Maybe they should have had the Empire actually invade. Would have made this part of the game more interesting at least. Oh well.
Oji! ここは私が引き受けよう。下がっていたまえ、中将。はっ。
You will back down now, or we'll be more than happy to arrest you right here and drag you to Berea City, kicking and screaming.
Damn. This is ridiculous. I'm afraid you'll be doing no such thing.
What? Who's there? Oh! It's
the Railway Military Police.
We have our orders, and nothing you say will change that. Disarm them, men, Lord Eustace included.
That will not be necessary.
What?
Impossible.
Lord Rufus? Lord Rufus!
Reen, no! If you're not careful, you'll be drawn into it.
What are you? What?
Huh?
What was that? Toa!
not today, buddy!
Are those arts?
Yeah, but where?
See you later. Cross Crusade!
Are we safe?
Go! Unleash the mystery within yourself!
That won't be necessary.
What?
Whoa, 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 whoa! Were those wires?
Admirable, but naive. Allow me to give you a taste of reality.
That's enough!
A hawk?
Look, I get it. In isolation, a scene like this isn't a big deal, and can potentially work in a positive way. But if it happens over and over and over and over and over, I just can't. The Trail series has a serious Deus Ex Machina problem, and if you don't know what that means, it's Latin for God from the Machine, where basically the problems in a story are suddenly wiped away by the hand of God, or the author, and loosely refers to anything that suddenly occurs out of nowhere to change the course of whatever's going on, usually for the benefit of the protagonists. This happens a lot in this series, especially in the Cold Steel quadrilogy. Sure, the first game was the one that started the trend, like seen here and at the final boss, but the most egregious contrivances like these were probably in Cold Steel 2 in the final dungeon, where you fight a number of overpowered adversaries at the end of each section, only to have the fight taken away from you afterward by someone else entirely so you can continue onwards. It's repeated moments like these that give me the impression that the writers do not know how to properly create actual tension and meaningful progression when it comes to action scenes. Maybe part of it is down to the somewhat absent variation in animation due to Falcom being a smaller game developer and having to cut corners or something, I don't know. At least in Reverie things got a bit better in that regard, but it's still guilty of the same nonsense. So pick and choose your favorite, not so fast moment, and you have the number 6 worst entry. Or just pick all of them. I won't blame you. But there's other Deus Ex Machina moments in this series that are even more ridiculous, and we'll get to that soon.
His power's beyond comprehension.
Can he even be defeated by human hands?
He's just like the flame demon in ancient legend. How can anyone be this strong?
I don't like doing it, but it's better than us all dying here. Heed my call! Valor!
That won't be necessary. Take this! Shining Phoenix Slash!
Father!
I see I arrived not a moment too soon.
If there's a holy trinity of hot anime garbage that Japan likes to forcefully shove into any story, it's Hot Springs, the beach, and high school. We've covered Hot Springs already, so let's move on to the obvious one of this series, high school. And believe it or not, I'm not talking about Trails of Cold Steel. No. There's a part of Chapter 2 of Trails in the Sky that grinds the already slow-paced game to a screeching halt in order to give you a side tour of Genis Royal Academy, and get Estelle and Joshua involved in some top-tier cringe with Princess Chloe. If it wasn't for this crap, Chapter 2 would have been one of the better moments of the game. Everything involving the orphanage that got burned down was a fantastic emotional pull that was easily the highlight of the chapter, but it took a back seat because you spend a lot more time fooling around in the Royal Academy for some stupid stage play that only serves to inspire a stupid love triangle with the 3 main characters instead of continuing to investigate the fucking fire that burned down a fucking orphanage. For some reason, they thought this stage scene was so good and clever, they created cheesy versions of the game's other songs just for this event. But no, it was just annoying, and just served as massive tonal whiplash that ruined this entire chapter for me. Alright, time to talk about Trails of Cold Steel 4. Wouldn't be a proper worst moments list if this game wasn't on here, would it? There's so many ass-pull plot devices in the entire Cold Steel saga, but I think the one that takes the cake for the most ridiculous Deus Ex Machina moment is when Rean is rescued from the Black Workshop while he is still in his cursed berserk state. This whole thing came off like the writers had trapped themselves in a corner, with our main character Rean in the clutches of some of the most powerful actors in the entire world, in a location so far under the earth that it's nearly impossible to find, guarded by the most powerful and advanced technological defenses ever made. And somehow, they had to make up some way for our little high school heroes to not only break him out, but free him from his curse, the nature of which they have no understanding of.
What could possibly go wrong?
This entire sequence was so brain-meltingly stupid that I could hardly wrap my head around it. Once they get to the Black Workshop and find Rean, how do they pull him out of his berserk state? With the power of friendship, of course. I guess Rean has this imaginary crystal thing inside him that isn't explained very well, and everyone's feelings charge this crystal with positive friendship vibes or something, because of their convenient magical cell phones that allow them to connect, and... holy shit, the more I explain this, the stupider it sounds. It only took me a few minutes to think of a better way this could have played out, that involves whichever waifu you chose for Rean, but that would require the dating sim aspect of the game to be done competently. We'll get to that later. Anyway, Rin returns to normal and they have a standoff with a ton of very powerful characters, and they are greatly outclassed here. If the villains were taking this fight seriously, this would have been over in a heartbeat. But of course, they just stand around and talk at each other for as long as possible until you finally get a decent boss battle, which of course is one of those that you don't really win when you win. Then, at just the right time, everyone on the outside uses their magical teleport powers, including Thomas Lysander's ultimate Deus Ex Machina technique, the partition, to get everyone out of there at the most convenient time. This was the moment when I started to dislike the story of this game more than the previous ones because it got so absurd to the point my suspension of disbelief was just utterly gone. Your emotional manipulation don't work on me. And somehow, it isn't even my least favorite moment of Cold Steel 4.
Together with my friends and students, I pledged to dispel the dark shadows hanging over Erebonia. I'm Rin Schwarzer of Class 7.
So let's put everything into perspective. The absolute biggest war, possibly of all time, is about to go down all over the continent of Zemuria. Every single nation is involved in some way, and so are all of your main characters. Millions of lives are at stake. Powerful cryptids and demons are involved. These divine knights with the ability to harness the power of the Septarians will have their final showdown to either save or doom the world. And it's all going down tomorrow. What do you do? Go to a fucking theme park and have a party, of course. This series wanted to be a slice-of-life anime so hard in spite of its subject matter that it sidelined the most important event in the series' history so that you can dick around and have one last shitty high school reunion. Waste your time on lame theme park attractions with the other characters. Watch some of them get drunk so that they can have a fucking hangover during the big event. Then have that fateful moment for Rin and his waifu of your choice. Because of course. All while oh so conveniently protected by a force field. Because of course. The more I think about Cold Steel 4, the more I think that I shouldn't be thinking about it because I guess you're just supposed to turn your brain off when you play it. The amount of narrative dissonance is just so damn high that I'm starting to believe that this game is straight up bad. But after having it in my favorite Trails Moments video and my top 10 JRPG antagonists video, and it being my number 2 in my top games of 2020 video, well, I'd look pretty silly to say such a thing, wouldn't I? This moment might have been number 2 if it wasn't for the only part that really matters, when Rin faces off with Cassius in order to become a Divine Blade. Yeah, that's right, I said it. Your choice of waifu doesn't matter at the end, and is probably trash, just saying. Deal with it. And don't worry, we'll get to that. Remember way back in number 9 when I said this series has a serious problem with commitment? Well, if there's one glaring, blinding, shiny example of Falcom's refusal to commit, it's the one that people have pointed out the most. Any character that's on the protagonist's side has the most overpowered plot armor I've ever seen that rivals even Dragon Ball Z. Nobody ever dies, and when they do, well, you know. The amount of major characters that actually die during the events of Trails, villains included, is less than the total number of games released, which is absurd to think about given the context of what's happening in the story. There are no stakes, there is no tension, there is nothing to worry about. Everything will be okay. Everything will work out in the end. I think the most prominent example of this is across the Trails of Cold Steel series. I'll exclude Osborne from this for various reasons, but the first real death we get to witness on screen was Vulcan, a side character with minimal plot relevance, so he won't be coming back. Maybe. Only time will tell. Then Crow at the end of Cold Steel 2. Of course, he comes back about midway through Cold Steel 3 as a temporary antagonist and an undead. What happens towards the end of Cold Steel 3 was in my top 10 favorite moments video because it went way off the deep end with a lot of wild, chaotic events and then some prominent character deaths that were very surprising. Angelica and the Emperor were both shot. Then the courageous airship is destroyed with Toval, Victor, and Prince Oliver inside, and the most brutal one we get to witness, Milliam, who sacrifices herself to try to save everyone. All of which makes Reen lose his shit, go berserk, and aid in destroying the world. It was an absolutely wild ending. But of course, Cold Steel 4 had to come along and reduce this ending's impact into nothing. Man, this game really fucked everything up in hindsight. That's 3 entries in a row, just saying. Angelica survived, the Emperor survived, Oliver, Toval, and Victor all survive and come back with the Courageous 2 Electric Boogaloo, and right at the very end of the game, in what's probably the dumbest moment of them all, they use an ass-pull miracle power with the Septarians to give Crow his normal life back, and bring Milliam back into a new body because I guess somehow Elisa's father knew that all of this would happen and made a new Milliam behind the back of someone in full control of his body and mind. What the serious fuck?
Come on. Come on, baby. I just want out.
I'm sorry, but your happy ending rings very hollow when you have to pull this ridiculous amount of unbelievable contrivance to make it happen. This shit made no sense, and seemed like a way for the writers to avoid certain types of shitty fans being mad at them for killing off certain characters, even if they do it in ways that actually make sense to the story. Instead, your refusal to commit to character mortality made this story less exciting and lower stakes than it should be. So, you got your fans mad at you for different reasons instead, as I know I'm not alone on this one. Even if it meant sacrificing my boy Oliver, I'd take that over what we have now. Blasphemy, I know. Before we get to number 1, here are some dishonorable mentions. Remember that most of these are optional, except for the Lay Lockley Training Grounds from Trails in the Sky 2nd Chapter. This boring place takes up the first few hours of the game, and you only have Estelle, who is an all-arounder with not much going for her in the early game, and Annalise, who's probably the worst offense-oriented character in the trilogy, with all of your magic arts stripped away to only the very basics. This makes the combat exceptionally tedious and dull, but it's manageable. Unless you're playing on Hard or Nightmare, in which case this beginning of the game is probably the most unfairly difficult part of the entire series with a boss that's entirely dependent on RNG. Nicely done. Pom Pom Party from Trails to Azure and Beyond. Who thought it was a good idea to introduce a ripoff of Puyo Puyo into this series? At least the Blade and Vantage Masters card games were somewhat original. Bonding moments and school side chores from Trails of Cold Steel.
Oh my god, who the hell cares?
Can we just get back to the main story already? Fucking slice of life filler content. The beach scene at Michelin from Trails to Azure. Probably don't need to explain this one. Michelin once again from Trails into Reverie. Well, if you somehow enjoyed the Michelin segment from Cold Steel 4, you can always go there again in Reverie to ogle your waifus with 7th gen graphics in VR and pretend to take selfies with them. You fucking weeb. Moon Door 3 Descended Wings from Trails in the Sky the Third. It's fortunate that most of the third's shitty content is all optional, because here we fucking go wasting time following Chloe's school life at Genis Royal Academy yet again. The only interesting part of this segment is that it involves Lecter, who's an important character, but only after this game in Azure and the Cold Steel series, so you wouldn't know that as you waste your time in this event if you were playing these games in the right order. Sun Door 2 Legendary Angler Estelle from Trails in the Sky the Third. I hate fishing in video games.
Stop it. Get some help.
It's always tedious and boring, but at least this one doesn't last very long. Star Door 6 Training Agate Style from Trails in the Sky the Third. If there's one thing worse than reducing your party members so that your strategies no longer work, how about getting a trio of complete rejects to control instead of your party for this utterly tedious flashback sequence that massively overstays its welcome, because actually winning battles with these goons is a time-consuming exercise in frustration, with barely any interesting story bits as a reward to make up for it. Fuck this door above all the others, even the fishing one. If I had included optional content in the main list, this probably would have been as high as number 3. Maybe. My number one worst part of the Trail series is the absolute state of NISA's localizations of these games.
You're a fucking idiot. This needs to stop. Now.
Just kidding. I'm going to dump on Cold Steel even more. Because of course. What if I told you they replaced one of the best aspects of the original Trails in the Sky trilogy with that aforementioned holy trinity of hot anime garbage? High school, beaches, and hot springs. Well, replace beaches with swimming pools, add dating simulator mechanics, and you basically have a short summary of most of my annoyances with Trails of Cold Steel. But there's one specific moment from these games that irritates me to no end. That memorable aspect of the Trails in the Sky story I'm referring to is the budding romance between Estelle and Joshua. Many fans have their reunion as one of their favorite moments in the entire series, which is understandable because, to put it shortly, it just works. But that's not the only romance in the game. There's Scheherazade and Olivier, which is often played off as a running gag throughout, but regardless, it culminates in them getting married at the end of Cold Steel 4. Alongside that, we have Agate and Tita, which isn't explicitly a romance in the Sky games, more of a strong familial bond, but by Cold Steel 3, Tita has a massive girl crush on him that he's seemingly oblivious to, which is rather amusing. There's also Kevin and Reese to consider, whose romantic bond develops over the course of Sky the Third. All this is to say that it's impossible to have such romance arcs when the entire concept of actual romance is replaced with dating sim mechanics so that everyone fawns over the main harem protagonist, Reen, and Lloyd to a lesser extent, as the whole bonding moments as a mechanic started in Trails from Zero after all. But poor Reen, even though he isn't a bad character at all on his own, he is still kind of the poster child for everything wrong with the way they changed the direction of this series. And they made it very clear very early in Cold Steel 1 that the game was going to be derivative hot anime garbage when Reen accidentally gets a face full of Elisa's tits in one of the most cringy cheap fan service scenes I've ever seen in a video game. That has all sorts of implications that fly in the face of everything the game lets you do later on, while still being emblematic of the things I hated the most about Trails of Cold Steel, which is why this is my number one least favorite moment. It's so much more than just stupid cringe. Throughout Cold Steel 1 and 2, you're able to basically play matchmaker for Reen with several different options to choose from. In case you're wondering, my favorite match for Reen was actually Toa. They have similar mindsets that gel very well together, and Toa's potential future career in international affairs would make for an interesting setup for Reen's future as well. They also both end up being teachers in Cold Steel 3, which is fitting. My second choice for him would be Laura due to their kinship as warriors. Very easy choice, I know. But I digress. Back to Cold Steel 1. This ridiculous scene follows Elisa's first introduction, which is also silly anime nonsense, and the game is making it very, very clear that they are trying to shove you in Elisa's direction, but she's just not a good fit for him in my opinion, and is probably the least likable female main character in general, unless you count Elise. I was open to being convinced otherwise as I've gone out of my way to go for 100% and view every single bonding moment and ending for each character, and, well, you failed to commit. You refused to commit. Yet again, here we are. If this game had taken the same approach Trails in the Sky did with its romance and committed to having Reen locked into a romance arc with Elisa, or even someone else, it probably would have been much, much more convincing and made for a more compelling story. And not only that, by locking them down, you would have an opportunity to explore romance for the other main characters like they did with Scheherazade, Olivier, Tita, Agate, etc. But instead, they're all there for Reen and nobody else, while they just pretend that there's nobody else in the world they could possibly like. Even the other male characters don't really have time for it either, because their time is taken up by bonding moments with Reen as well. It's so hard to suspend my disbelief when it's all laid out like this. Turning Trails into a harem anime was the worst thing that ever happened to it. And what do you even get for choosing a waifu for Reen? A few short scenes that have no bearing on the main story whatsoever? Well, that's just nice, isn't it? And to make things even worse, consider the implications of these options going forward in the series. Because remember, Trails into Reverie isn't even the halfway point for what they have planned altogether, from what I remember reading. What happens when they reintroduce these characters years into the series' future? Will they be married? Will they be forever alone? Will they be dead? Can they even do anything like that to any of these characters after giving the players the option to choose Reen's waifu? They've put themselves into a bit of a pickle, I'd say. No matter what they decide to do, it's going to piss some people off. If it was up to me to reintroduce Rin years later in this story, for example, I have no fucking idea how I could make it work other than, I don't know, Rin becomes the Chancellor of Erebonia and also the signature anime older male character who dies somehow, which you know they won't do because Falcom are terrified of killing off their characters. Anyway, I'm just rambling at this point. Those were my top 10 worst moments in the Trail series. Hope you enjoyed it or got salty. Either way, thank you for watching. Feel free to drop a comment on what your least favorite moments are, and share this video with any annoying Trails fanboys you may know for the lulz. I do want to make one thing clear though. I'm not against fan service despite how this video may come off. Just look at what's in my Game of the Year videos, just saying. I just find cheap pandering insulting, which is what the vast majority of this series' fan service moments felt like, and they do nothing for me. Like they think they can't hold our attention if they don't flash some horny bait in front of us every now and then, and it's just not true. I've yet to play Kuro, but from what I'm hearing, people seem to think of it as a return to form, so we'll see. Don't forget to subscribe for more nonsense from me. Check out my other top 10s, follow me on the Twitter, Rumble, or Odyssey, join my humble Discord server, and as always, have high standards, low expectations.